So just quickly about me, I'm Jim Vada, Chief Wireless Officer here at Seven Signal, and a lot of stuff about me there. We've also got Chris Couch with us. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Chris.
Yeah, Chris Couch. I'm a senior sales engineer with Seven Signal. Married of certificates and things. I am a skydiver, so I have my USPAC license up there. Nice. My second office, as I was telling Jim earlier, is hanging out an airplane. So it's a nice picture I got from a friend of mine I was jumping with. And you can see that, I've done many wireless designs over the years. I stopped counting at 50, 60 million square feet of warehouse space. So somewhere in there. But yeah, so I'm glad to be here.
Heather, we've been shown up with that profile picture of Chris hanging off the side of the picture above the clouds.
It would take a lot of ground to make that up too.
I guess I could, put a picture of me in my cycling shorts on my about me. No, not as impressive. Okay.
Yeah, I'd refrain from that one, I think.
Please don't, says Andrew. Fair enough. So first thing we want to talk about is the year in review, and the way we can look at this is through the predictions we made at the beginning of last year, and just kind of see what came true and what didn't, and what's kind of we'll see, undetermined. We'll know in the future, or it's kind of fuzzy. So quickly we'll get through some of these. First, we'll start with the good stuff, what we got right from our predictions last year. Wi-Fi 6E will start to get deployed in the enterprise, but there'll be a little bit of a limitation from supply chain bottlenecks from getting that deployed. And that will drive WPA3 and OWE in the enterprise. Chris, as far as I can tell, that's really the only thing driving WPA3 is Wi-Fi 6E and the requirement that you use WPA3 and 6 gigahertz.
Yeah, but you're still seeing that kind of mixed mode too, because you don't, you get the benefits of WPA3, but you're still bouncing between the bands. So,
and that's a whole can of worms to unpack too. And speaking of those cans of worms, we said we weren't sure what it would be, but we knew there'd be bugs. We knew there'd be pain. We knew there were unforeseen issues that would occur. And we know what they are. It's around AP discovery and how clients react to that mixed WPA2, WPA3 SSID and the different permutations of that. So Anders says he's got mixed emotions about mixed mode. Most of my emotions are on like the fear and hate and and confused side of the spectrum.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Then we also, we talked about Wi-Fi 6 being the most dominant PHY and certainly a new WLAN, and of course we see that. One of the things that came out was this idea that Wi-Fi 6 will be skipped intentionally in favor of Wi-Fi 7. I don't see any evidence of that in the enterprise. Everyone who's ready to refresh their APs is ordered Wi-Fi 6 or 6E APs as far as I've seen. Any thoughts there, Chris?
No, I mean, it's not even ratified yet. So, I mean, you can't bet an enterprise on a non-standard. You're just going to put yourself in trouble if you do that.
Yep. Yeah, you're just kind of waiting for something that doesn't exist yet, really, although it's coming, and we'll talk about that. Another thing we got right is we'd already see the hype, the marketing hype, Heather, for Wi-Fi 7, and particularly in the consumer market. And we have seen that. There's consumer APs and maybe a smartphone out. Not sure. I haven't really paid that close of attention to the consumer side of things, but the hype train is rolling there. And comment from Keith. Thanks for Keith in the chat. He says he does have a few customers that are happy with their current stuff and are waiting for Wi-Fi 7. So interesting data point there, Keith. Let us know what's motivating them to wait. And
That's
the other
true.
thing,
Sorry, Jim, you said why upgrade if you don't need to? Well, we had that conversation this morning, which we'll get into later on, but we'll
yeah,
talk about that.
yeah, and the need to upgrade is a lot flimsier than it was in the early days of Wi-Fi, for sure. And the other one that I think we got right is seeing some interesting use cases and real world things happening with 802.11 fine timing measurement. And the one that really blew me away was what Aruba is doing with Open Locate on their access points for providing indoor location, fine timing measurement being one component of that solution. So very interesting development there.
And there's a couple good blogs on that too that have been written by some pretty predominant Wi-Fi folks out there on that. So
yeah. Okay, so the big swing and a miss for us, really for me, this was my call. Last year was I thought the iPhone 14 would support Wi-Fi 6E, and it doesn't. So a lot of head scratching there. We did see the iPad Pro that was released a couple months ago be the first iOS device with Wi-Fi 6E support. So got it wrong with the device, but it did come. Support did come this year in a different form factor. And then things that are kind of up in the air. Last year, we said the 6 gigahertz AFC and standard power APs would come out in 2023. So we're going to stick with that prediction and judge it next year to see if it'll come true. One of my pet theories is around rethinking WLAN life cycles, like Keith mentioned. Why upgrade if you don't need to? And what's the need today to upgrade? And I think with the speed of new Wi-Fi generations being released, it's definitely challenging to come up with a new business case for the next generation of Wi-Fi every couple of years. But I'm not going to go all the way down that road right now. This is one I'm a little bit more skeptical than I was last year around Wi-Fi sensing and how it's going to be deployed and how it's going to be used. And really interesting technology. If you check out our backlog of webinars, we did one on 802.11bf Wi-Fi sensing, just introducing it. But it certainly got a lot of hype, and I'd like to see some real world demos and POCs that show what it's actually capable of doing for us. So we'll see on that one. And then the last one, and this is something we highlighted as a future area of interest that has some potential, and also something that doesn't get very nearly the attention of some of the other work in the IEEE is 802.11bc broadcast services. We did a webinar on that as well. That's a really interesting capability for an access point to share information with unauthenticated, unassociated users that happen to be in the area. So for marketing purposes, you could use it to say something about your business to Wi-Fi users in the area if they want to go see it. Or, that's kind of like the obvious use case, but there's a lot of different use cases that could come up if you think about just in general, what information, what data would be useful to share with unassociated Wi-Fi clients that are near an AP or near a network. So that's a long-term thing. We'll see if anything happens there. Any other thoughts there, Chris, before we start getting into next year?
I was just thinking Yeah, I mean that the broadcast service is definitely interesting when you think about it. You know, with the same way with BLE in the whole kind of mad push for that, and the development on it's been kind of slow. It'd be interesting to see how that plays into it, or maybe takes over for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting to see if there, if that could be something that could be combined with location services to, do something even more interesting. So something to keep an eye on. I think it's one of those kind of under the radar things that could have some potential. Okay. We've looked backward. Let's look forward to 2023 and our exciting predictions about what we'll see next year. First thing, the hype train for Wi-Fi 7 is going to be in full steam ahead. And there's really, I think, going to be this disconnect with the reality in enterprise where most of us have either recently deployed Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi 6E, or in the middle of it, or are just waiting for APs to deploy Wi-Fi 6. And the conversation, the marketing conversation is going to move to Wi-Fi 7 pretty quickly, despite there not being a lot of hardware available yet, or it'll be bleeding edge hardware, first gen hardware that you probably want to avoid. So that's something I see happening. I think we will see the first generation of Wi-Fi 7 clients and access points in the enterprise, targeted for the enterprise, in 2023. Think we'll have some bugs and pain. These are pretty easy predictions so far. It's going to be painful. We'll have some early stuff. We're not saying anything about a standard being released or even a Wi-Fi Alliance certification. We'll just have the stuff out there anyway, and
I think
fix it in prod, right, Chris?
Yeah, I think some of these we can just remove 6, insert 7, repeat, and
you know
move
what?
forward.
That is history repeating itself.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about that and talk about the Wi-Fi 7 timeline. But I think one of the newest kind of totally new feature for Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi 7 is multi-link operation. And I don't know what will go wrong, but something tells me that that's where things will go wrong with Wi-Fi 7. That's going to be, one of those brand new things that, when we take them out of the lab and and put them in the real world, there's usually a need for some refinement for those features. Those new classes of features start working.
Yeah, it's I'm actually really excited to see this in action and really understand how it functions and what it's going to look like to try to troubleshoot it. So it's it's going to be very interesting to see when this comes out.
Definitely, particularly if you can use it, in a 6 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz situation, and use that to potentially dramatically reduce latency. It could be pretty useful.
Yeah.
So in the real world, when we step back away from Wi-Fi 7 a bit, what actually will be happening, like I mentioned, is the continued deployment of Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E. I know Keith said some people are waiting for Wi-Fi 7. I think definitely if Wi-Fi 7 lines up with your AP refresh cycle, it only makes sense to buy what's new on the market. But I wouldn't necessarily sit on your budget waiting for the next generation of Wi-Fi if it's time to refresh now. And I think that's a common theme we'll see next year. So I think we will see the FCC, the AP vendors, and everyone involved, probably the courts, sort out 6 gigahertz standard power operation, get everything in line to actually start working, and get APs of those class being sold, being blessed to operate as in standard power next year. Although I'm not as confident in this, but I think that some AP vendors will save standard power for their Wi-Fi 7 APs and include it as a feature of Wi-Fi 7. So it'll be interesting to see how that happens.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm curious to see how this one plays out this year.
Yeah, we do have a lot of and hello to everyone who keeps saying hi in the chat. You can add more color to your comments if you'd like.
Yeah,
but I think we already have a couple, I think 6 AFC operators that have the first round of approval from the FCC. I don't think it's the last. I think there's more work that needs to be done. I think the FCC, when they approved those, they also said, we're not sure how we're going to do final testing on these yet. So that remains to be seen. But I think we'll have something in prod next year. Anders, Wi-Fi 7 minutes with Wi-Fi 7 eyes from 7 Signal. Heather, this is going to be, Wi-Fi 7 is going to be a marketing bonanza for us, right?
Treasure trove.
Because Wi-Fi 6, 6E, and 6 gigahertz isn't confusing enough. We'll go hog wild with Wi-Fi 7. So I'm going to double down on the iPhone prediction and say the iPhone 15 will support Wi-Fi 6E. But I think it'll be the Pro model. That'll be a way for Apple, which didn't do a great job with the iPhone 14 of really separating the Pro from the standard model. I think they might do that with the iPhone 15, make it the Pro support Wi-Fi 6E, just like the iPad Pro does. And the iPhone 15 will be for, the unwashed masses and 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. So we're going to double down there.
I like it.
And I think there's more to unlock with 802.11 fine timing measurement. I wouldn't be surprised if we see people following Aruba's footsteps with what they did with OpenLocate, and coming out with systems just like it, or doing other really novel, interesting things with FTM. I think there's a lot of potential there, and there's things I can't even imagine that, like OpenLocate was, that are just waiting to be unlocked. So that's the list. No screenshots, please. We don't want to be held accountable for anything. This one's not being recorded, is it, Heather? Uh-oh.
You're in trouble.
I should have sent my demands in like the analyst companies that say, oh, you can't record these. This is live only. Anyway. Any other thoughts here, Chris?
No, I think you're right. I think the FTM stuff is going to be interesting to see, because the vendors always come up with neat and unusual ideas that most people don't think of using these features in the first place. But with Aruba's the OpenLocate stuff was pretty neat when it came out last year, and it was absolutely just really eye-opening. So I think it's going to be neat to see how other people take and twist this into their own and put it out into the field. So I'm looking for the ingenuity to come out of it.
Yeah, it has some limitations, like it's very difficult to get hardware from different vendors that isn't calibrated to work well with FTM, from what I'm told. But if it's all within the house of an Aruba or Google already supports it with Android and their Google Wi-Fi. You can use FTM with that. There's still a lot of innovation, I think, that could occur.
Sure.
So let's talk about that Wi-Fi 7 timeline. And just, looking forward, I think that we're going to kind of repeat the backwards process we had with Wi-Fi 6. I think that next year the hardware will be released. Excuse me, the Broadcom and Qualcomm have chipsets out on the market now. And we'll get APs and clients next year. And I think that the hardware is all gonna be released first. Next, we'll get a certification, a Wi-Fi 7 certification program from the Wi-Fi Alliance, which, following kind of the timing we had with Wi-Fi 6, could have to wait until 2024 for that to occur. And then even later, potentially into 2025, if there's any delay, we'll actually get the 802.11 standard amendment, 802.11be, finalized by the IEEE. So this makes me scratch my head. I think in the perfect world, we'd agree on a standard at the IEEE. Then the Wi-Fi Alliance would say, okay, this is what we're going to do in the real world. These are the minimum required features to get that Wi-Fi branding, that Wi-Fi certification stamp on it. And then everything would get released out in the market, and we'd all be happy with open, interoperable standards that everyone supports. But we've kind of flipped the process on its head, and I think, just driven by the need for vendors to have new things to sell. We're starting with the gear first and working our way backwards into the standard. So.
Yeah, Andrew's made a good comment earlier saying that we'll probably see a bunch at CES this year. So with the Wi-Fi 7, so it'll be interesting to keep our eyes on that too.
Absolutely, yeah, CES for sure. I'm sure there are things being planned right now for Wi-Fi 7 demos there.
Ron just said, is it going to be another situation where a wave 1, wave 2? And I certainly hope not, because that caused more headaches and problems between AP deployments and keeping models right and features. I certainly hope they don't try to do that again, because that, in my opinion, that was just that was rough.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I know, they had that with 802.11ac. We kind of casually had it with 802.11ax, where there were pre-standards APs released by most of the major AP vendors that were Wi-Fi 6 compatible, but not certifiable, because they didn't support uplink OFDMA. So, but I also think, just looking at the feature list in Wi-Fi 7, I would be surprised for anything not to be able to meet all the requirements of Wi-Fi 7 when the stuff hits the market right away. So we'll see. That's a good question. So the last drum I want to bang on a little bit is AP refresh life cycles, and we had some questions around that, and this is kind of my pet theory, but the question essentially, because a lot of enterprises have built into their budgets now 5-year AP refresh cycles, and that's kind of lines up with getting a new generation of Wi-Fi. But I think that the capability of Wi-Fi for enterprise use cases has matured to the point that I'm not sure it makes sense anymore. The early days of Wi-Fi definitely made sense because you had these real applications just waiting on the sidelines for Wi-Fi to have the performance to meet their requirements. So, you know, you couldn't do a Zoom webinar on 802.11b APs. I mean, maybe in the very best circumstances, it might kind of work, but probably not. And it would sort of work with G. And once we got to N, yes, video became a real reality in Wi-Fi in a way that it wasn't before. You could say the same thing about voice. Certainly the same thing about just raw performance for doing system updates and big file downloads. Going from B to G to N, the end users really felt an improvement in performance that was tangible. And I don't think we really see that anymore. I think that, you know, Wi-Fi is mature and basically supports most of the major use cases in the enterprise today and in the future already. So the question is, you know, there are some, but they tend to be less common. But what are the real world use cases that are the business drivers for enterprises to deploy Wi-Fi 7 or that Wi-Fi 6 unlocked for them when they were deployed? I think it's a harder question to answer than it used to be. And I would also add that, you know, if you think about like what's the minimum PHY and spectrum required to meet typical enterprise application requirements today, you could deploy an 802.11n network as long as you had 5 gigahertz support and the DFS channels, of course. And, you know, everything would probably work just fine. So, you know, so we had this, I feel like the drive to replace APs so frequently is kind of leftover inertia from the first decade of Wi-Fi that needs a little bit of a rethinking. And I think actually Ethernet is a good comparison. If you think about Ethernet on the edge, you know, the dominant PHY for Ethernet at the access layer is gigabit Ethernet. And that was released in 1998. And there's been a lot of new PHYs, a lot of speed upgrades, a lot of new capabilities added to Ethernet. But, you know, going past a gigabit at the access layer, why? We've already met, you know, we're using a 25-year-old PHY, but it's still for the most part far exceeds the application requirements in the enterprise today. We're just starting to see multi-gig, you know, with 2.5 and 5 gigabit kind of creep in, and there are some definitely, you know, some use cases that need that and benefit from that. But think about it, you know, we've had all this development in Ethernet, but we got to gigabit Ethernet and said, this is the performance that we need. Everything else is a little bit, you know, extra. It's not really needed. Yes, please continue and release these new PHYs. And of course, they're very useful in data centers and in, you know, trunks and so forth. But are we getting somewhere similar with Wi-Fi where there isn't a strong use case for deploying Wi-Fi 7 or Wi-Fi 8 when it comes out? If you look at the marketing around it, they're talking about, you know, virtual reality and the metaverse. Is that where your business is going? I mean, I don't know. I don't see a lot of people making real plans around putting all their employees in VR goggles and spending the day in a metaverse.
Yeah, I
Maybe.
mean, yeah, you got a good point. I mean, it's until something comes along that requires the bandwidth, and then it's really going to, kind of drive that. But also too, we've talked about this in the before, is that, with switching upgrades, on the campus edge, and power requirements for the new access points, kind of drives, that the natural upgrade process for the switching, so that kind of you don't have to go that route, but most everything is going that way anyways. And for the switching vendors out there to be able to build older switches to support the older PHYs, it's just easier for them to go forward and
Yeah.
to support and eliminate the older stuff, because it's just legacy technology that doesn't really need to be there if it's, it can run on the newer PHYs, 2.5, 5, 10, whatever.
Yeah.
That's kind of driving it. So I think the power requirements and the speeds, I think, are just going to go hand in hand to really push that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's 1 gig's been there forever. It's done just fine. Even, when AC came out, everybody's like, oh, you're above 1 gig. What are you going to do? It's like, okay, well, push a gig and tell me at that point, how many times are you actually pushing it up full, even what 940 or 870 or whatever it is.
Right.
How often do you really do that? And how often do you actually bottleneck that, unless you're in, like a stadium, or you're not in an enterprise, you're in a specialty environment, or you're, doing an auditorium, or, a giant lecture hall where you have people all streaming video at the same time, and you need that additional bandwidth. But for an enterprise, unless you're rendering something, a 3D CAD or something, or somebody said spreadsheets in 3D, unless you're doing that, I don't think you're really going to be, that 1 gig limit's probably still going to be there. And it will probably be okay, but you're going to see the manufacturers push that, because as they advance these speeds on the edge, they're going to naturally move everything forward.
And that seems like a pretty reasonable time to upgrade to N-base-T, is when you're forced to replace your switches to go to the 802.3 BT PoE. And switches have a very long lifetime. So that's actually a good parallel. This is kind of where I'm going to with this, is like, well, your gigabit Ethernet switches probably ran for 10 years and were replaced because the vendor stopped supporting them, not because they weren't actually good enough for what you wanted to do on the network. Maybe it's time to think about access points the same way. Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 7, I think, will meet the enterprise requirements for the next decade the way 5 gigahertz 802.11n met them for the previous decade. So, and part of that is because of the unlocking of the 6 gigahertz band being such an important new capability for Wi-Fi. But what we get into now is a lot of customers, they're replacing APs that are perfectly fine, but they're going out of support by the AP vendor because they're not given the same life cycle that the switches and routers and firewalls that they're buying are given. And so just the drum I'd like to bang on for a bit. I'd like to see things change there, and it's going to be challenging, I think, for AP vendors to make a strong business case to their customers that every generation they need to deploy.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I'll look at the opposite way from the infrastructure side, or from the vendor side of things. They got to make money too. They want to sell new hardware and they want to keep innovating. But if they're supporting 10-year-old gear and you're just paying support on it, that doesn't help them. So the natural push to newer technology helps them with these new standards, so they can sell new gear. And the other thing is trying to build the obsolete devices. How do you continue to manufacture old hardware? It's 10 years old when the new stuff's there. I mean, it's that balance of, same thing with vehicles. They got to, supposedly have to be able to support, 7 years after the manufacture date for parts. But, is that in the days of chip shortages, is that relevant? Can that actually function that way or not? And I think we're going to talk about that in a minute too.
Yeah. Yeah. Good one. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, it's a, you know, interesting life cycle that I think is going to change. But it's definitely, to your point, the supply side's addicted, and the shareholders of those companies love the frequent hardware refreshes, and it's definitely something coming that would have to come from the demand side for anything to actually change. So, all right. Well, after that mini rant, we can get into some Q&A, and anybody else that actually, you know what? Why don't we do our poll? I think we haven't done the poll questions yet. I should have paused earlier for that.
No, it's okay.
That's okay. It's a good way to cap everything off, hearing from everybody. And then while I run these polls, Jim, if you want to go through the Q&A and get those fired up, I will get these polls rolling. So we've got 3 of them for you today, everybody. So here is poll number 1. Question is, what do you think the Wi-Fi 6E adoption rate will be in the enterprise in 2023? Didn't even finish the question, and some of us are already really opinionated about this one. So let's give them a couple seconds to answer that. Chris, you want to
just remember, I do. I want to say that these are going to be in next year's webinar for your answers. So answer wisely. You will be tied to them. No, I'm just kidding. No,
I guess we should have practiced with that.
Truth be told, we were not brave enough to put our stake in the ground on an answer for this question. So we thought we'd just ask everybody else.
Perfect. All right. It looks like people really got those questions in, or those answers in. So let's see how we feel about these answers.
So we have about, we're tied 38% on both 0 to 25% and 26 to 50% adoption. So I think we talked about this, Jim. We were kind of in that same kind of realm. I think it is really going to come into play when it comes to, supply chain and what's going to be available. I think is really what's going to kind of dictate that. So I think we were kind of on the same track with that. Yeah,
interesting to see. 23% are saying above 50% of that's a very high adoption rate. I think it'll be 25% or lower next year, but yep.
All right, let's move to question number 2. Question number 2, how long until we start hearing about Wi-Fi 8 APs?
Oh, this is interesting.
Yeah.
A couple more seconds. Pretend you hear the Jeopardy music. Keep saying that joke, and someone always laughs about it. So I'm just going to keep saying my dad joke. All right. Fun. Going once, going twice. We had 70% participation last time. So there we go. All right.
All right. 71.
Can't fall below the threshold. All right. How are we feeling about these responses, guys?
I hope it's that long.
Yeah, me too. That's if it's any sooner than that, then it's definitely the marketing machine in full action. Beyond the vaporware, pre-vaporware at that point, I think is what that's looking like. So
and if you wanted a negative answer because he's already hearing about it.
Well, if you look at your Wi-Fi 7 timeline, Jim, and kind of thinking of that ratification, that 24, 25 timeline, you'd be looking at 27, 28 for Wi-Fi 8. So it's just like anything when we saw before with N and AC and AX and 6E, you're probably going to see the hype a little bit before, but I would probably think between that 6 and 12 month time frame is probably good thing to hear. It may be sooner though, since Andrew said it.
I think it's going to come up a lot in actually discussions about Wi-Fi 7, because there were some proposed features in Wi-Fi 7 that were bumped out of the whatever it is. I don't I hesitate to call it a standard, but they were bumped out of Wi-Fi 7 that are probably going to come back in Wi-Fi 8. So we might be hearing about those kind of things.
All right, we've got one more for you. Gonna go ahead and launch this. When will the supply chain? I'm guessing that's supposed to say change or chain.
Yeah, it's supposed to say chain. Yes, it's got a little
Keeping us on
autocorrect.
our toes. When
Yeah.
will the supply chain finally catch up to demand? Got a couple of different
This was
options.
the hardest one for me. I really don't have a clue.
Yeah, it's just in time manufacturing is such a tight knit thing that if one thing goes wrong and you throw a global pandemic in it, everything goes wrong. That's why you see lead times of a year. I mean, at that point, like I said, with trying to figure out if you're going to support older equipment and you're trying to struggle to build a new equipment, where do you draw that line, and where does the regulatory come into play that says you have to support the old equipment to really force them to do that? So yeah, this is probably about what I was expecting to see in this poll. So we're about 62%, I think.
Some slackers. We were doing so good, guys. Going once,
Yeah.
going twice. All right, sold. All right. How we feeling about these results here?
1 to 2 and 3 to 5. So I think that's probably where I was in the middle of guessing where things would be. But Ron's saying he's already seen chip manufacturers cutting back production because they produce too much. Well, let's hope they're
Like
able
to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's hope it's new stuff and not old stuff that they're making that they can get out into the world. But yeah, I hope it's not that long. I really don't, because that puts us all behind if they're really trying to catch up, and it really affects everyone else that's trying to procure this equipment in the first place. But if it's 1 to 2, that's better than 3 to 5, and 5 years plus. There's at what point are you going to pay for something and wait for 5 years for delivery? It's just
You're right.
not acceptable. So yeah, let's hope it's that short. But well, I guess we'll see in December of next year.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thanks to everyone who participated in our polls. I think we're ready to move into Q&A here.
Yeah, that's right. We don't have 7 minutes of 7 signals. We have some extra time for Q&A. Is that right, Heather?
Absolutely.
So let's go to Anders. He says, how about those rumors of Bluetooth in 6 gigahertz with a scared emoji? The rumors are true. The Bluetooth SIG is proposing support in a future generation of Bluetooth for the 6 gigahertz band. And that's all I know about it. I think it's interesting because there's almost, how much spectrum could Bluetooth even use? Like, how much is it practical for its protocol to actually hop across? Maybe it's the whole thing. I don't know. And the other consideration is it's usually a lot cheaper to build radios for 2.4 gigahertz, and Bluetooth being an IoT technology is very cost sensitive. So 6 gigahertz is going to be a different animal there. So we'll see how much actually gets built and deployed for that. I wouldn't be too worried though. There's plenty of spectrum for everybody in 6 gigahertz. Another one from Anders. Any opinion on the current Wi-Fi 7 chips? We're waiting for features like coordinated APs, which looks like it'll be pushed to Wi-Fi 8. And that's what I was alluding to earlier. Those to me, Anders, those were the most interesting features in Wi-Fi 7. Should we wait for Gen 2 Wi-Fi 7 chips? Just my rule of thumb is yes. Don't deploy the first bleeding edge enterprise APs from a new generation of Wi-Fi. They're often short-lived. They're often kind of rushed to market. And the way we kind of release hardware and then later come out with a standard means there might be some missing things that you wish were in there, like uplink OFDMA with early Wi-Fi 6 APs. But that's just my opinion there. Any thoughts, Chris?
No, you're spot on. That's typically you see is, rushed first gen hardware that shows up, that's missing features that, as you said, we saw that, I've seen that working for VARs where, the first gen access point comes out. It's not top of the line. It doesn't support all the things that you normally have in your regular access points. So it's not even feature parity, and you're really losing features to gain very little.
Yeah, that's right. Question for Daryl. Oh, this could be a whole series of webinars. Do you have any specifications or recommendations for what a properly designed 5 gigahertz 802.11n WLAN should look like?
I knew you were opening up a can of worms with that one, Jim.
Just a couple of bullets. Design for 5 gigahertz coverage. Use as many DFS channels as you can. Probably use 20 megahertz channel width, maybe 40 if you can with your channel reuse plan. And without going into too much depth, anything to add to that, Chris?
Yeah, it's really going to depend. It's environment dependent. So it's going to be, is this a warehouse? Is it distribution? Is it healthcare? Is it, or external antennas appropriate? There's a lot of things that could go into that, but yeah, anything that you could do to tweak power and timing, and it depends. Yes. Yes, it depends definitely. But yeah, I think we could probably do a whole backwards technology design reference on this. That would be pretty interesting to see.
Yeah, for sure. Anonymous, lurking in the shadows, asks, are we at future spectrum contention between Wi-Fi and cellular bands? And yes, Anonymous, we definitely are. One of the upgrades to 5G is 5G NRU, the U meaning unlicensed, and specifically targeting the 6 gigahertz unlicensed band. So I think actually that was one of the motivators for the Wi-Fi industry to get start deploying into 6 gigahertz with Wi-Fi 6E rather than waiting for Wi-Fi 7 as quickly as possible to start getting a foothold there. So even though it's unlicensed spectrum and we can't make any claim to any particular band being a Wi-Fi band, at least Wi-Fi will have a presence, an established presence there before 5G shows up. And sort of, 5G was there first. We know the cellular carriers would treat it like their spectrum. And we're there now, and I think that's just going to get even more heated. Question from Andrew, any expectation for 5G to encroach on some enterprise Wi-Fi use cases? What do you think, Chris?
Oh, I'm trying to think of how you would integrate it. Because you'd have to, unless you're using VPNs or something to get back into the enterprise, where you're designing like a private 5G, is that more of the question?
I think it's, that's where my
so-
mind went, is private 5G.
So I guess you can look at it both ways. Is it a benefit to have a private 5G and new equipment and new infrastructure, or use an existing wireless infrastructure you already have that's already in place? There's a lot of questions I think on infrastructure specifically and cost around that that I would have. As far as not only equipment and everything else, but yeah, I definitely see companies trying to do it. I would, anybody that doesn't try, what's the point? But I don't know. I would like to hear if anybody actually tries this.
Yeah, and private LTE has been around for, I think, a couple of years now with CBRS,
Mhm.
and those 5G solutions will be out, I think, next year. I'm not as familiar with that. So far, the major advantages are outdoor coverage. Think of like an airport, or an industrial site, especially where you've got control of all of the client devices, and it's possible to upgrade them or replace them with cellular devices. And then another use case that I think has some validity to it is in industrial environments where super low latency is a requirement. It might be worth the money there. And mobility at the same time might be worth the extra expense to deploy a private 5G network. Although I think in most of those places, it'll run in parallel with a Wi-Fi network. So good question, Andrew.
So yet another radio to put in your mobile device that you have to drag around and waste your battery. So
yes. You think clients are bad at roaming between APs? How about roaming between radio technologies?
oh my goodness.
So Bruce has a nice comment about what I was talking about with rethinking enterprise AP life cycles. He says, I believe you're on point, but a lot of people will not see it. For many deployments, 5 gigahertz 11N will do for the true business requirements. 6E is a game changer in that it is new spectrum and double the channels, but we'll only see true value in larger installations where audible AP density is an issue, or other deployments where there's bleed over from other systems that don't allow the desired clarity. I'm not sure. I think it's not just a matter of escaping interference in 5 gigahertz. I think it's also a matter of adding capacity and reducing latency by having your clients spread out across more channels. That being said, many current upgrades are driven by a desire to remove old technologies in clients to enable faster overall throughput through a clean client base. Or he says, how many current upgrades are driven by a desire to remove old technologies? I think it is a driving factor when you get new spectrum available, because that's somewhere where you're not tied to that boat anchor of backwards compatibility with legacy devices. I mean, Chris, we have a lot of customers that are supporting 802.11b and G clients, and we ask them, when are they going away? And they say, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way to escape is to go to spectrum they don't support. So I think it is a driver.
Yeah. And that's really around hospitals. I mean, that's really going to force those manufacturers to improve, because they will make the best, most capable equipment in the world and use the oldest Wi-Fi technology possible. And it's just something you can't avoid with them. But yeah,
maybe one
that as a driver.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And maybe one last question here from Mike. What are your 2023 predictions for any new / troublesome, least capable, most important devices? And Mike, I think that the early Wi-Fi 7 devices are going to be pretty troublesome because in order to support MLO, the design of the devices where they've separated the radios from the MAC and all this new abstraction, it's totally different to make that happen. I wouldn't be surprised if that affects operation as Wi-Fi 6 clients, connected to Wi-Fi 6 when they're connected to Wi-Fi 6 APs as well. So my thought there. Chris, you see anything else that could be troublesome on the client front coming?
I think battery is going to be troublesome. I think usage, I think getting all of that under control and in a very low power setting. I think all of the new technology adds more draw to everything we do, and you're now transmitting over all three radios at the same time, or two of the three. That's just more energy spent. Waking up radios, turning them off, sending, transmitting at the same time, receiving at the same time. It's going to be a fine line balance to make sure that what you enable is going to make an improvement in your environment rather than cause your devices to be recharged every couple of hours. So you might see bigger devices because they have to have bigger batteries, unless there's a giant improvement in battery performance and storage capabilities that's going to offset that. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely a good point. And for some, mission critical networks, they've got devices that they want to run 8+ hours or almost continuously, just cycling batteries in and out. So big consideration for them.